welcome everybody. And on behalf of John and myself and Roger, who apparently is going to be with us for at least another 6 months, which is great news. We're going to spend the first part of this meeting, the majority of this meeting, I think, speaking with, well, it was originally going to be 2 members of the state legislature. Unfortunately, one of them, Representative Matt Gray, got the way for business in the real world to do. But we're delighted to have with us Senator Faith Winter, who will, I think, handle our questions and help us figure out where the state legislature is on some of these issues. So thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time. It's very nice of you to do that. Roger had sent both of them some questions that we had come up with, all of us together had come up with, and we're just going to run through those one at a time. But if people have follow-up questions or additional questions, if we have time at the end, by all means, let us know about them. So let's get started. Faith, do you want to introduce yourself real quickly?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. And thank you for your service on serving on the CAC and the time and effort and everything that involves, because that's a lot of work. It's a lot of meetings, and your input really, really does matter. My name's Faith. I am a state senator. I have been elected for the past 14 years. I started my career as a Westminster City Councilor and then was Mayor Pro Tem. So did a lot of transportation issues, especially along US 36 and the Flatirons Flyer and the HOV lanes and everything along 36, including not getting our rail, which I understand and more than happy to talk about as well, which is the last question. And then went to the State House, where I was chair of transportation there. And now I'm a state senator, and I'm chair of transportation energy in the state Senate as well. And I'm the sponsor of the large majority of a lot of transportation bills, and they all come through my committee. So ran the large transportation funding bill last year, ran the RTD Accountability Bill, and I'm looking at more bills this year, which I'll go into. And so very excited to be here. And I have some answers to these. I have more questions probably back to you for some of these questions. And I look forward to the conversation.
Thanks so much again for being here. I've met Faith, of course, back when she was on the Westminster City Council and in some of her other roles. And she's great. And we really appreciate her. And she's been a great supporter of transportation and transit all those years. So that's really fabulous. So
and I do actually ride RTD. Some trolls on Twitter like to talk about how I never ride a bus, but I actually do, especially pre-COVID. And for those of you that visit me at the Capitol, which please come visit me, I often have my dog Queso with me, which he rides the bus with me. I have a bag and I carry Queso in his bag, and he's very famous on the 120X going to the Capitol. Everyone loves Queso on the RTD bus. So I actually do use public transit when I can as well.
You could make yourself a lot happier if you just ignored Twitter altogether, and certainly the trolls.
I mean, I generally ignore them, but it's sometimes funny when they're like, Faith Winter doesn't take a bus. I was like, are you on the 120X? Queso and I are here right now.
Yeah. Okay, well, since you mentioned the Accountability Committee, as you know, that's our first question, kind of a general question about, so where are we? The RTD board responded. By the way, this committee, the CAC, also made some recommendations. The board agreed with us almost entirely, and mostly agreed with the Accountability Committee with a couple of variations in a couple of places where they said, well, wait a minute, we've got studies underway, we've got a FAIR study, we've got Reimagine, et cetera, et cetera. So we're kind of curious what happens next.
Yeah, so I think we've talked to the Accountability Committee. I'd love to hear your all ideas, but my understanding is a lot of the places that there wasn't agreement on were areas that don't necessarily align with what the legislature can do, right? So the legislature, right, and that goes, I'll jump around a little bit, right? But it goes into the governance model. And I will say the legislature is not interested in changing the governance model of RTD right now, right? Like taking away the ability to elect a board, especially for me, given my background, which granted, I care a lot about transportation, but for those of you that don't know, I've also spent almost 20 years training women to run for office, including some of the women serving on the RTD board, and really work at opening up elected positions. So I think we want RTD to be more efficient. We want their governance to go well. I think there's a lot of different ways to get there. That's not the legislature stepping in and taking over. I think there's probably, one or two people. I can't speak for the administration, right? The administration, so Governor Polis and the first floor might have different opinions than the legislature. But the legislature is not looking at ways to change the governance model, which goes back to this question of what's next, because I think most of the disagreements are disagreements on governance and on decisions that RTD makes specifically. And I don't know if there's a role for the legislature to step in on those areas. So we worked with the Accountability Committee and we ran the bill last year that did the changes that the Accountability Committee asked the legislature to do. So the Accountability Committee said, change the fare box rule, change XYZ, and we ran that bill, we passed that bill. We were really happy to do so. The areas that are disagreement, I don't know if there's a legislative fix. If you all believe there is a legislative fix, we'd love to hear it.
Well, just speaking for myself, the legislative fix is have the state provide some money for training. And that's a big ask, but I mean, there's a couple of questions on this list, as you know, and we've talked about it in our committee. Colorado is a little unusual in that it really provides almost no, essentially, money for transit. A lot of states do provide money for transit. Colorado is so decentralized in so many ways. And, is there any hope of getting some money, let's say for low income people, perhaps to improve their mobility? So
I'm super excited to talk to you all about this, right? So last year we had our $5.3 billion transportation funding bill. It's still not adequate. It's not going to be enough, but it's the highest level of investment we've ever had in the Multimodal Option Fund. It's also creating a new enterprise for transportation in non-attainment zones. So I drafted that bill. I know Representative Gray would say the same thing. We drafted that bill with the intention that we are investing more money than we ever have before through those two options, which are the Multimodal Option Fund and the Non-Attainment Air Zone Fund. In my opinion, I think RTD qualifies for both those funds. RTD represents 3.5 million people, which is over half the state. They should get a lot of that funding. Now, I've had conversations with RTD, but I've also had conversations with other transit agencies, and I've had conversations with CASTA. So RTD is very hesitant to go after those funds because they're conservative, not in like the political conservative, but conservative in, will those funds exist forever? Well, the sources of the funding for those funds exist forever, so they should exist. And RTD has a lot of hesitancy around spending some of those funds on operations. Now, I worked with CASTA very closely to put language in 260 to ensure that both the Multimodal Option Fund and the Non-Attainment Air Zone Fund could be used for operations. there's a whole variety of opinions on if they can't. Actually, there's not a variety of opinions. My bill drafter, the state, other transit agencies, and CASTA all think it can be used for operations because I know how important that is. For some reason, RTD is very hesitant and thinks those funds can't be used for operations. And so, yes, funding is an issue, but we can't just fund new routes without funding operations. In my opinion, it is legally set up for both the Multimodal Option Fund and for the Non-Attainment Air Zone Fund to be spent both on routes. It could be spent on low income fares. It could be spent on operations. It could be spent on getting riders back. And so I need your help in getting RTD over that hesitancy because there is new funding. So that's new funding from 260. And then the governor's budget, which we'll talk about the ozone-free days or ozone-free seasons, and we'll talk about that in a minute too. But that's another pot of money that the administration is talking about infusing into the system. So now from the state level, you have 3 new sources of revenue that I'm begging you to come take, right? Like, please, like, I fought really hard for this money, really hard. I'm taking it on the chin. There's, a ton of people that are very angry about those fees from 260. But the reason I fought so hard for that was to increase those pieces of funding. And I need RTD to come use them, and you can use them for operations.
Are those funds long lasting in the sense that RTD can count on them being around for enough time to, really start using them and for operations?
Yes. I mean, I don't know the intricacies of how multimodal option funds get approved, right? And I've asked RTD if there is a legislative fix I need on how RTD accesses the multimodal option fund, let's talk about it. Because right now it does go through like Dr. Cog and the STAC and CDOT. And if that's not working, let's talk about it. Because that is a legislative fix we can do. And if it is working, then please go after those funds. And please hear me when I say you can use it for operations.
Roger, just curious, do you have any insight into what RTD's hesitancy stems from?
So ask that again, Matt.
Do you have any insight into why RTD apparently is quite hesitant to use the money from these various funds for operations?
I don't. Maybe Christina does. I mean, I believe there are at times disagreement on interpretation of what they can and cannot use these funds for. So, and Pauletta's joining. Maybe Pauletta has some insight on that as well.
Yeah, Roger, unfortunately, I don't have insight into what might be the reason for that. And I don't know if Pauletta got into the audio when she was joining and got the question fully.
Right. And so, help me work through this. I've also been incredibly transparent with RTD that if access to these funds is too hard, too difficult, or show me the language where you don't think you can use it on operations, because I've talked to other transit agencies across the state and CASTA, and without exception, everyone in the building, including my nonpartisan lawyers, including CDOT, including the administration, and including other transit agencies, believe this money can be used for operations. The only pushback I've had is from RTD. And so I've asked if there's a legislative solution, because the legislative intent is absolutely that it can be. Right. And then obviously there's going to be more federal dollars coming into the system, but here's 3 pots of money that the state is trying to make available.
Senator, have the other transit agencies that you've spoken with mentioned anything about temporary funding? So if this money can be only utilized for a certain or finite amount of time, and they've built a service and, of course, a ridership around it. After the money is not available, what happens with the riders who now have become dependent? Has there been any conversation on what happens after?
No, and we need to have that conversation. So the multimodal option fund is ongoing. The non-attainment air zone fund is ongoing, right? Both of those are ongoing. Those fees, so when we say it's $5.3 billion for transportation, that's just in the 10-year timeline, but none of the fees sunset in 10 years, right? We just used 10 years as an example to be able to talk about it. But those fees don't go away. And they continue in perpetuity. So those are going to stay around. Now, we do obviously have an infusion of one-time money. The state has, our next economic forecast comes out on Friday, but the governor's budget has some one-time funding, right? And some of it is one-time, and it's designed specifically, though. We've heard from a lot of these transit agencies, including RTD, that they have to bring ridership back, right? And so, yes, do these one-time, like where's that break-even point of, can we use one-time funds to bring ridership back, because ridership back also brings revenue, but we can't continually support at that level for whatever the ozone free days, which I know you have questions around that too, right? But ozone season free days, what that looks like. And so it's a question, but should we turn down money and bring ridership back because we're worried about the future and what that might mean? And that's a question for you all. Like I said, I have lots of questions for you guys too.
Yeah, they're hard for us to solve too, although we can obviously pass this on to the board. Is Paulette still on?
No, I don't see her.
Okay, yeah, I don't see her either. Well, okay. How about the rest of you on the CAC? Any additional comments or thoughts on the Accountability Committee or on some of the topics we've just been discussing?
I would make a comment, and that's that we need to do a little more research on the issue about the funding. I find it very interesting, and perhaps have some faith that we'll hope that we will be able to do something with this. It's just too quick. We can't answer, Senator Winters, that we can't give you an answer yet, but we certainly appreciate what you've shared with us, and we'll run forth with that and see what happens in the next couple of months. Is there a timing on when these funds should be obligated or spent, or how does that look?
So they'll be obligated on a yearly basis in the same way that the multimodal option funds are obligated right now. Okay. The new fees start being collected in 2023. So right now, the increase in the multimodal option fund is coming from one-time ARPA dollars and federal funding and infrastructure funding, but then the fees are going to come on in 2023 and never go away. And we very intentionally in 260 allocated a lot of money to the multimodal option fund. That doesn't mean future legislatures could change it, but given that we are relying on the multimodal option fund to implement reduced VMTs to meet our climate goals and where we are politically and legislatively in Colorado, right, I can't guarantee what future legislatures will do. However, I've been in the legislature for 7 years. I've been working on transportation within Colorado politics since 2003. And every time we've increased transportation funding, we've increased the allocation to public transit. And so I think it would be difficult politically for it to go backwards. And I would hope that we can make future plans on it. But, you know, there's no guarantee in life on that. But the multimodal option fund, this historic investment should stay. And as long as I'm around, I'll make sure that it does.
Thank you.
Anyone else with a comment or a question or follow-up?
Senator, it's been my impression for over a decade, not longer, that the legislature is generally hostile to RTD and the way it's operates and the services it provides or doesn't provide. Do you think the accountability process has addressed those to say your satisfaction?
No. I mean, honestly, no. For a whole lot of reasons, right? So, and I would say it's not that they're hostile. I think there is so much hope and optimism in our largest transit provider being able to actually do its job. And we keep trying to do what we can, given the fact that they're their own elected board with their own revenue income from taxes, right? And so what can we do without taking over? And I don't think, I mean, I'd love to hear if you guys think the state taking over makes sense. I don't think it does. And then, you know, RTD keeps doing things like the end line's open, but it didn't go as far as it was supposed to. And we're going to just keep not talking about when we're going to get rail up 36, and we're going to cancel the Broncos ride. And right, and it's like, how does RTD start setting expectations and over delivering instead of setting expectations and under delivering? Because when those expectations are set, so when RTD took away the Broncos ride, I had so many constituent calls. Right. And I am a Broncos season ticket holder, and it's awful getting to the games now. It's awful. Like, I'm sorry. Like, they're just, the services they said they're providing, they're not providing. It's awful. Right. And so I take those calls. I'm sure some people call the RTD commissioners, but a lot of them call me. When they wanted to cut the airport line from Westminster, which I have a lot of airport workers that live in Westminster and work at the airport, I got those calls. Right. And so I would say the legislature isn't hostile, but it is frustrating taking calls from an elected body you're not taking votes on. That, and the, you know, like talking politics, most of the people representing the RTD district, not all, but most, tend to be Democrats and want to support public transit. And we're put in a spot where we're defending public transit, we're defending RTD, and we also don't understand why those decisions are being made, right? And we ask those questions, like, I asked RTD directly why they cut the Broncos ride, and I didn't, you know, other than, I mean, it probably comes down to the driver shortage, but I got like a whole litany of like reasons why, right? And so then I take the calls as a public transit advocate from public transit users that aren't being served. And that creates frustration. So I would say the legislature is not hostile. They actually really believe in RTD, want to help RTD. And it's one of the reasons a lot of my colleagues worked really hard to increase our multimodal option fund in 260 by so much, is to support public transit. We just haven't reached that tipping point where it's helping our citizens yet in the way it should.
So is it just like how the board sets priorities, or is it just, I mean, I hear you, and you mentioned a few specifics, but is there sort of an overriding issue that you think is in play in the legislature, that, or the General Assembly, I should say, that that has to do with how RTD makes decisions, or what actually levels of service they provide, or what would you say is the kind of the general issue?
So for example, I asked for an update on how decisions are made on when routes are added or cut, right? So there was a whole dust up in Adams County when RTD shortened the route to the Justice Center, because that's how people get to jury duty. It's how, if you have a DUI and you're not allowed to drive, and you have to go to court, you get there in RT. That seems like an essential route, right? And all my local elected officials and all the state officials were like, RTD, please don't do this. Deborah Johnson was very nice and actually went and like did the walk, but it didn't change anything. It still got cut, right? And so I think, why was that decision made, and how was that decision made, and why aren't you transporting my airport workers, and why aren't you, I think, and I've asked for an update on how they make those decisions, and haven't really gotten that. I don't think there's a ton of transparency in how those decisions are made, because I follow RTD pretty closely and I don't know how they're made, right? And so I think that's a frustration, and I think it's a frustration when we see decisions made in a press release about really impactful decisions to our constituents, and we're not at least given a heads up. I think people would like to be consulted, but like, even like a, hey, we're cutting this route, like, hi, I know you represent Adams County and we're cutting your judiciary center route, right? Like that would have been nice to know before it happened. So I think it's a little communication, it's a little how decisions are made, and maybe coordinating on those prioritizations, right? Because we also represent our community and talk to our community a lot, and we might have different priorities.
Senator, thank you for sharing that. And I agree that communication is key for all of this going forward. There has been a lot of work, and I think that perhaps we could do and have a conversation on how we could do a better job of getting this in front of you and others who need to see this before it goes out to via press release. Part of what my team does is work closely with the service development team and doing the service adjustments 3 times a year. And the challenge is always it looks like a cut, but they do I think a fairly good job of making sure there's something else that aligns, but it does still mean a change sometimes. Like the government center, there was still service, and I know that part of the challenge for us on a communication standpoint, I'll speak for myself, is the word got out that it was completely cut, and we needed to do some work to make sure that we were telling people there is still a way to get there. And that's just one of the examples. But I hear what you're saying, and I'm going to get with our team and make sure that you have an understanding of how these decisions are made. A quick overview is we've got the May service adjustments coming up, and we start launching that process in January. And so we'll have listening sessions. We have one coming up with the Denver Public Schools in the first or second week of January, in which we speak with them about what their bell times look like, what their students are needing, and how possibly we can work together to arrange for our bus services to best augment the fact that they don't have operators as well. So they're struggling with that. But yes, the resources and operators are a big driver. And when we make adjustments, they're not always additions. There may be subtraction from one side to move it to the other, because when we look at equity, we have to look at the entire district. So if we take from over here, we need a balance over there. But I won't go into the full details. I think I'll go ahead and like I mentioned, I'll reach out to my team and make sure that they get the information that you're asking for, and we can get into a further detail on how we can best communicate.
Yeah, and I would actually say the majority of representatives and senators representing the RTD area are huge public transit fans, right? And want to be champions of RTD and really want to make sure that RTD is working for our citizens. So, and remember that the legislature is very different than the first floor, right? That the first floor is what we call the administration in the building. And, you know, I've Representative Gray and I have pushed back pretty significantly on the governor and his criticism of RTD. So I'm speaking very openly and honestly with you all today, but obviously this isn't things I would say publicly either, right? If you look at everything I've said publicly, it's been hugely supportive of RTD and anything we can do. And that's why we worked really hard to try, when the governor said none of this money is going to RTD, right? I was like, no, actually we designed it to go to RTD, right? Like we designed this money to go to RTD. It's not a line item because it's not how transportation funding works in Colorado, right? But so much of this money should go to RTD. And that was a whole huge fight with the administration. We were like, why? Matt and I were like, why did you say that? That's ridiculous. So anyway, I'm speaking like very openly and honestly with you all, but take it with that. I am a huge RTD supporter and public transit supporter and want to do everything I can to help make sure RTD is successful.
Well, and yes, we very much appreciate that. It's really interesting to hear your comments. And if I can kind of jump ahead a little tiny bit, to me, this takes us to the whole reimagine process that RTD is undertaking, because I think the question is, let's assume at some point the driver shortage gets cleaned up. Yes, that's causing a lot of the problems right now, clearly, no question. But let's assume over time that settles down, and we're really looking ahead 3, 5, 10, 15 years. The question is, what should the priorities be in a huge district where honestly there is just simply not enough money to provide all the service we want? Well, it's just like pretty much every transit agency in the US. So welcome to the club. One of the questions we had for you was, I don't think we want the state legislature to come in and tell RTD what to do, but are there some recommendations, suggestions, ideas, thoughts that, would be really useful if the legislature would say, okay, we understand it's a balancing act, can't provide everything to everybody, but here are some of the priorities, whether it's service for lower income people, whether it's the routes that have the highest ridership, whether it's, the routes that are the most cost effective. There's a lot of ways to slice and dice this. And that's kind of what Reimagine is supposed to figure out. And we've been involved in that. But it'd be lovely to hear if you have any opinions, both right now, but also looking ahead over the next year or two. Do you want the legislature to weigh in a little bit? How do you see that proceeding?
So I think that's a great question. And I do want to have this conversation around the Multimodal Option Fund, the Non-Attainment Air Zone Fund. And then, we will have this conversation about the one-time funding that we're looking at for free fares in ozone season and what that looks like, because I just had a call with the administration about that earlier this morning. And how we can do that in the best way, right? So hearing from RTD, hearing from you all on what makes sense for the Multimodal Option Fund, because if we need to put guardrails around that or prioritization around that, we can do that, right? And so if we're like, the Multimodal Option Fund should go to the places we can reduce VMT the most, or it should go to places that serve low income folks, or it should go to places that serve essential routes like hospitals and judicial centers, right? What does that look like, right? And so we can put some more constraints around those two. Obviously the Non-Attainment Air Zone Fund is designed to clear our air, right? So there's already some requirements around that. But those are, the allocation of funding from those, we could add some more guardrails around if we think that helps make decisions in a better way. Now, I know that there's, based on your question, some concerns about this, free transit during ozone seasons, which I'd love to hear about and what those concerns are. I think our largest concern is, one, we've heard loud and clear across the state, we need to bring ridership back. Is this one of the ways we can? Two, we want to actually improve air quality. That's why we would do it. Three, can we do it in a way that drives higher ridership routes or low-income routes or worker routes or essential worker routes? And I think there's some compliance questions around, I might get myself in trouble, but I think Title VI of federal money, right? So we don't want to violate Title VI. So and I am not a policy expert on Title VI. I've been meaning to be a policy expert. I've had a very busy December. So help educate me, right? So if the state has money that we're being allocated through one-time funding right now to bring ridership back, to start changing behavior, how do we do that and not violate Title VI while also clearing the air? I think the administration and definitely myself and Representative Gray that are bringing that bill are 100% open to different suggestions and ideas on how to do that, and have had mixed messages on federal law. So I need your help. So like I said, I'm bringing lots of questions to you too today on if we are allocating this one-time funding, if our goals are to bring ridership back and clear the air, how do we do that the best, right? RTD is the public transit agency, you're the Citizens Advisory Committee. We're really, really open to suggestions.
Just two quick comments, and then again, hopefully other people will chime in. One is, in terms of putting guardrails, as you put it, on some of the funds, not necessarily the clean air money, as you are well aware, money is fungible. So, just because you say this small amount of money has to be spent on X doesn't necessarily change anything in the big picture, because it's a pretty small percentage of RTD's total revenues and expenditures, and other monies can be shifted around. I'm not saying that they would do that in a bad way. It's just they have to balance all the service needs of the whole area. The second question, we really haven't talked about it, and this is where I'd love other people to chime in, but I mean, I asked the question, and it was simply that I don't think people change their behaviors, especially on short notice. Oh, look, tomorrow is going to be a bad air day. It's going to be free. Yeah, well, people, I don't think, change their travel behaviors on 12 hours notice. It's one thing to say you can't run your lawnmower the next day. That's easy. You just wait another day. It's a whole.
We definitely are not doing days. We're doing a season.
Okay.
Right. And we're talking about what that season is. It's too hard to implement both for consumers and agencies on a day-by-day basis.
But
right?
you don't have enough money to provide free fares for an entire season, certainly.
We're working at it.
Well, I don't think anybody would turn that, but that's a fair amount of money. The only other thing I'd say is we did talk about it a little bit. And as I recall our conversation, a lot of what's going on out there in other transit agencies is what they have found, and polling has shown, is that, yes, free transit is lovely, of course, wouldn't want to turn it down. But in fact, what really entices people to use transit is better service. That is the number one, absolutely most important thing. You can make it free, but if it doesn't work for somebody, free isn't useful. So the question is, do you spend the money on free, or do you spend the money on improving service? And that's a good question.
Well, and what does that look like? And how do we measure that? Right. And we're open to those suggestions. But again, this goes back to Christina's question. There is some one-time funding. Like, how do we best use this one-time funding? We have it. We're really excited to have it. You have a legislature and an administration that wants to spend it on transit. Right? Like, we got to figure this out.
Okay, well, maybe we've got some answers. Travis and then Andrea.
Sorry for not having video. I was trying to run it off my phone to the internet issue. But one thing I was going to say is, I think if you look at places like Boulder, for instance, they've achieved slightly higher transfer ridership because of the EcoPass and really finding ways to sort of suck employers into a network that then reinforces ridership long term. I don't know how that would look with RTD and with other transit agencies in the state, but there's potentially a way to build some sort of program that really encourages like new businesses to participate in an EcoPass type program. And then even if one-time funding goes away, a certain percentage of those businesses, might continue in some program like that. And in a sense, like pick up, because it's tough to take away benefits from employees once they get sort of used to it being provided by work.
Andrea?
I just wanted to comment on the multimodal option fund. And it seems like after listening to you go back and forth on that issue, that there just needs to be clarity. And I think the legislature needs to clarify legally where that money can be spent. And I can see why RTD would hesitate, thinking that the money might not continue, or that the money wasn't meant for them or for operations, let's put it that way. There just isn't the clarity that RTD is demanding. And I think they're a little bit too demanding, because Senator Winter, you have clarified that personally, but I think they're taking it as personally isn't enough. And they're too set in that statement to actually understand that they can use the money. So there needs to be legal clarity that says, yes, this money can be used for operations, period. End of sentence. That's how it is.
So Matt Gray and I feel like that's how we wrote the law. Our lawyers that wrote the law agree with it. And other transit agencies agree with that. And CASTA agrees with it. So everyone else thinks there's legal clarity. And I am not disparaging RTD at all, but I've asked, please show me in the language, because I am more than happy to run a bill, more than I could easily introduce a bill that says, no, I meant multimodal option fund could be spent on operations. I really, really mean it, but I can't do that without language from RTD on why they feel they can't, right? Like I need RTD to say, here's the language we need. Now, other transit agencies have said, we're just really super nervous because we don't always get money, right? And it doesn't say that the multimodal option fund is there year after year. Doesn't mean you always get the same allocation. And that probably isn't going to change, right? And we can talk about that and what that looks like, but the multimodal option fund is there year after year. The money is not going down. If you're performing, I think you're going to get the money, right? But if you're not, there's an allocation process, just like there is in all money in state government, pretty much, right? Like you get money or you get a tax credit and you have to show you're using it and it's performing. And so, I can't write a line item that binds future legislatures to saying RTD gets this percentage of multimodal option funds. But I believe in RTD enough. And I believe that RTD can qualify, and I believe that they can perform, that they're going to keep getting that money that is going to be continually allocated.
And I would disparage RTD in this issue, that they have not paid attention to what people are saying. I don't understand why they're so set when they've been told otherwise. And outside of saying yes, and that was the issue, outside of saying yes, this can be used for operations, which it doesn't sound like you really can say that.
I mean,
it's going to be a constant tug of war.
Yeah. So, I mean, if anyone has language that needs to be done, I've run many bills in my legislative career that's like, no, I meant it and I really do mean it, and here I mean it again, to add clarity. And I'm more than happy to do that if we need to.
Joe?
Thank you, Senator Winter. I'm really glad you're here to talk to us. I want to go back to Matt's discussion a little bit about the having the season and having free days. I think my concern about that is, and I think if I were at RTD, you have a season that's free and then all of a sudden now it's not free and then it becomes free. And then I think in order to provide good service, in my mind, one of the first things that happens is you need consistency, and then you need frequency, and then you can talk about fares. But to me, if I can't, and I've been a bus rider for 60 years, so I look at it and say, gosh, if I know the bus is going to be there, when it's going to be there, then I'll figure out, we can work out how I get to ride that bus. But I'm not convinced that giving free days on the bus is the way to do it. I think it would be better to put resources towards consistency and frequency. Anyway, thank you.
I mean, I think it's both and, right? Right. And I think it's figuring out that tension when the administration has this money that they specifically want to use to help clean the air in the summer, right? So consistency and frequencies year round, does that ultimately reduce single occupancy vehicles and reduce VMTs? Yes, but does that impact right away? And, to be fair, we've heard a ton about trying to get ridership back. And does that help? Does it not help? I think we're really flexible in what it looks like, knowing that there is it's one-time money, right? Like, we can't change that. That's just federal money. That's what's happening right now. There's a lot of one-time money all over the place, not just in transit. So how do we use that in the best way, in a way that helps reduce pollution? Because those one-time money that reduces pollution, and this is what's on the table, but if it's not the right thing on the table, help me format what should be on the table.
All right. Well, we will spend some time on this committee talking about that. We've only talked about it a little bit. The last conversation we had, of course, predates this potential infusion of money for clean air. And so we haven't had a chance to really talk about where that would go. Do you have I know what was in the governor's budget, but do you have a sense of really how much money that might be?
In the budget is 28 million right now.
And do you think the legislature is going to adopt that?
I think if anything, they'd increase it.
Okay. All right. Well, that certainly gives us something to think about. I mean, that actually sounds like real money.
It's real money. And it's not ongoing, but that's because it's federal government money coming down, right?
Right. Yeah, that's
above my pay grade, but I'm happy to spend the money coming from the federal government in the best way possible.
Okay. We've actually, and we need to let you go in just a few minutes. We've asked just about every question except one on the Front Range Rail District. But before we get to that, one more time, if anybody else has any comments or questions on what we've covered so far, accountability, reimagine, et cetera, et cetera.
So, I mean, honestly, RTD is so wrapped around the fare study and reimagine. And given that I've lived in both the local government world and the state government world and worked with RTD, I was much more informed and up to date as a local government official. Just how you interact with RTD, the different committees, versus being the chair of transportation, right? So I know these things are happening, and I don't know what the recommendations are. I don't know what the outcomes are. I don't know where the conversations are. Representative Gray and I are more than happy to help facilitate that conversation, but we want to be partners with you all. We want to be partners with RTD because I actually don't know where those conversations are. Like, I kind of see some things in the press over here. I hear things once in a while from my local government counterparts, but actually the state legislature is not really involved in these processes and don't know what's going on. And so you had these questions on here about these two processes. And I was like, well, I don't know where they are. I don't know the timelines. I don't know the discussions. I don't know the recommendations. And I think a good next step would be for RTD and this committee and anyone else involved to figure out what is the best way to involve the legislature, right? Because yeah, we have 28 million that the governor is recommending. We have this multimodal option fund, but we actually don't know how to best incorporate that into what RTD is working on because we're not part of these processes. And so how do we bridge that gap? Because when I was a city councilor and mayor pro tem, I knew exactly what these were. And now I'm removed. And so let's fix that because that's a process thing and that's fixable.
Yeah. Honestly, I think we have problems with the process too, which can be, we say, a bit opaque from time to time. Andrea?
Just a quick comment in passing why people may not be coming back. I live on the E line, and more often than not, which is really scary to me, people taking the E line downtown can get downtown and then they can't get home. They are constantly canceling E line due to driver unavailability. It's either from 6 a.m. to noon or from noon to 8 p.m. And if you don't know if you can get home, that means you're not going to take the train. So that's a whole nother issue, and we don't know how long that issue is going to remain. Drivers are where it is right now.
Yeah. Joanna? You're muted.
There we go. Sorry. I really want to thank you, Senator Winter, for putting some things on the table for us to grab onto and look at. It's very refreshing for our committee to have some challenges put on our plate. And I know we've said this many times, we have a lot of people with a lot of excellent backgrounds and a lot to offer. And I really appreciate what you've put out here today for us to look at. I am concerned that we get at it in a shorter time period than we may always, but I certainly, as one of the co-chairs, want to take it back to our group and spend some time hashing out how we can respond to you and so forth. And I am not pleased to hear that as you've moved up into the ledge that you have less access to the information that you need that you may have gotten when you were in local government. I got it. I kind of understand it, but it has to be frustrating. Anyway, just really want to thank you for this.
Thanks.
Christina?
I wanted to echo the same thing, Senator. Thank you for your time. And I think all the information that you've shared with us and also where the gaps and how we can do better in communication are something that I'm going to take back to our group and our government relations folks. And we'll talk about ways in which we can continue to keep you better informed. And as far as, the reimagine process, it's a great time to have that conversation. We're coming to the end of what the system optimization plan is going to look like going forward over the course of not only next year, but going beyond that. And I think it dovetails very well into the funding that you're talking about. And again, that conversation on how we could work together and ideally make it work for the folks. The thing that we always hear in Reimagine is and I think Joe hit the nail on the head here, is people like to have something they can rely on and they can count on, and that's, I think, is something that I'm always concerned about, is if we introduce really great service and then having to take it away. You mentioned the Broncos ride. It's excellent. And then there's days where we just aren't able to continue because of operators or funding or whatever it might be. It's a hard message to pull service back for people who really rely on it. And that's really the good balance that we're trying to strike. But again, conversation for another day. And I look forward to speaking again with you and the rest of the team.
Yep. Absolutely. And I look forward to your recommendations. And I think the most timely one is there's 20 million, maybe more, one-time funding on the table, right? And that's not just RTD, that's state. Like, we need to decide what that looks like. Is it in non-attainment areas? Is it high ridership areas, right? Because we're going to have to refine it. Or is it statewide, right? And the idea on the table is free rides during ozone season, not ozone days. But how do we make that work? And if there's a different idea on a better way to spend that, let me know. Especially, I talked with the administration this morning. I think they're open to gearing it more towards workers or low-income workers or disproportionately impacted communities, knowing that Title VI is out there, right? And having you all help us spend the money in a way that doesn't violate Title VI, but also makes sense for building ridership, reducing VMTs, helping clean the air, right? And so that there's a lot of things like on the table, but that piece is the most timely because we're making those decisions right now. We're going to start drafting a bill soon. And so put that at the top of your list.
All right, we hear you loud and clear. And thanks for being so clear and so honest with us. It's quite refreshing for people to do that. So we really, really appreciate it and very much appreciate your time and your energy on all the transit issues. And we promise that we will get back to you.
That's great. And thank you for all your work. It's a lot of time and dedication, and I really appreciate all the energy and passion that you put into this work.
Yeah. Thanks,
Senator.
Thanks so much. Roger?
All right. That, I think, was really a great discussion. Thanks for having such a good turnout also. So there's not just a few little updates. One, Matt and Joanna kind of took the thunder away, but I'm very pleased to report that we're going to be on for a 6-month extension. That allows RTD enough time to get the RFP put out, people to respond, the evaluation, and then if there is a transition, it'll be a transition directly to the new company, or hopefully we'll win that process. But that's something we like to do and are fully looking forward to the opportunity to propose again. So with that said, I don't have to report on how we're going to manage the transition. I can report that I've started reaching out to board members to get dates for the 2-on-1 meetings. And I hope to have the ability to send out some of those dates and times next week. And I realize people will be heading into the holidays, but trying to get some of them on the table for January so that we can start that process. I'll also get a meeting schedule out for 2022, and I'm going to put a link in that will be good for January to June. And then, we'll see where it goes from July on. And either that link will continue or there'll be a new link. But I'll get that out so that we'll have that, and I'll send a calendar notice. Again, the calendar notice will go just January to June, and then I'll either send another calendar notice out or someone else. And we're going to stick with the same time on Wednesdays. The January meeting, we've kind of already got a pretty exciting. There is a series of public hearings that will be occurring around service changes. Is that right? Oh no, redistricting. Sorry, and Christina can probably give us, but the RTD has asked that we allocate at least an hour of the time on our January meeting to be one of those public hearings, so that we would be kind of co-hosting that process, and hopefully having a lot of citizens join in on that meeting date, on that meeting. So Christina, you can probably describe what you have in mind a little bit better.
Well, at this point, Roger, that's about all I do have. On Friday, I'm going to be meeting with some of the team here to get a little bit more of what they'd like to see from that process. I am not leading the process. I'm just over here helping and assisting. But you hit it right on the head when you said, we want to involve the community. This is already a public meeting, but we're looking at least making sure we're promoting it and putting the agenda out ahead so that folks know that this is one of the places among some of the other outreach opportunities in which they can learn about the redistricting process, what it means to them, and how they could provide the input either right then or at a future date. So just overall, from the way I understand it, is we've got January and February to provide these public meetings, get the comments, and roll it over to the board. And the board in March will, move forward with that recommendation or adjustments if there are any at that point. So that's it in a nutshell. But I'm glad to hear that it was something you guys were already thinking about for January. So appreciate it.
A question for Christina. Are the public meetings for redistricting or for the transportation schedules?
It's for redistricting.
Okay.
Yeah. For the one we want to co-host with the CAC. We will be having some conversations in public meetings about service adjustments, and we're looking at late January into February for that. So that'll be a completely separate process. Of course, you're all welcome to join those, as is anyone in the community, but we wouldn't co-host those with you.
And that would be the May adjustment.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
The May adjustments. And you might have heard me say that we're looking at bringing in some of the Reimagine system optimization requirements or initiatives out of that. It's all really going to be something that we introduce over time. So I think that, in my opinion, we'll start with a Reimagine light, and then as we move forward over the year and then the next couple of years, we'll be introducing more of those optimization opportunities. As we move forward, we get more drivers and more resources.
Thank you.
So one other thing I'm going to report, as I was getting prepared for possibly transitioning this over, and also with Jim joining us, he had asked if we could access some of the old meeting recordings. So I have been putting together a Dropbox that was going to go to RTD, but I'm just going to make it available, and it's close to being complete. So I've put recordings and agendas and presentations all in that Dropbox. And RTD, it's kind of on the long range, and there's still discussion, I think, about website updates. But for now, this will be a resource that you all will have, and we'll be able to just drop all the presentations and information into that Dropbox. So look for that link coming soon.
So Roger, we were just given a bunch of homework by Senator Winter. And
yes.
The question now is, when and how do we?
Well, I mean, I think January we can have a good discussion on all of those and prepare something to get back to her. I can send out notes to the rest of the group and, well, to everyone about kind of what she's asked for feedback on. I think, honestly, I personally believe that there will be very few people that'll participate in any of these public hearings on redistricting. There's just not much that the general public can comment on, but the board requested it, so staff is accommodating that. But I just am not sure what we're going to actually hear. So my guess is we'll have a lot of that meeting to use.
it's a pretty wonky issue. So Danny just sent in a chat, which I agree with, which is if we're going to talk about some of those issues, our homework, as it were, yeah, are there some resources, whether ahead of time or somebody or bodies at the meeting, whom we could ask questions of that could be really useful in terms of, well, kind of everything, service, and why aren't you accepting this money, and, you know, on and on and on, all the things that Senator Winter brought up.
You know, my suggestion would be, let me compile, you know, kind of the areas and issues that she has asked us to look into, and then we'll work on who in the organization is the right, or inside or outside of the organization, are the right people to try to line up so that we have those resources. I think that's a great suggestion.
And Roger, don't you have a counterpart that does relations with the General Assembly?
Yeah.
I think that person ought to be involved,
like
ASAP.
I'm sure we can invite them to participate. You know, I kept quiet. I'll share with you at some point my feelings about what Faith had to say. You know, I think we probably have Congress people that question what the state legislature does, but they don't come in and try to direct the legislature. I believe RTD has an elected board. They are charged with understanding what they're doing and make the decisions they're making. You know, it's the same philosophy of, should the legislature be micromanaging any city council? I mean, so, but I think having our state lobbyists come and talk about some of those dynamics would probably be a great idea too.
Yeah, Joanna?
Well, one of my, mine not turned on. I can't tell. Can you hear me?
Go on, yeah.
Okay. One of my concerns, I guess, is that we hear, in light of kind of what Roger was just saying, that we hear from somebody in RTD, maybe the lobbyist is a good idea, but somebody else who understands these three funds that Faith put out for us to consider. We need to understand, what is the RTD point of view? What's the hesitancy? Or one of the things that is still not totally clear to me is what's the timing. If come January, they're going to be ready to do this thing on the air quality and this one-time funding, we don't have much time to make a response. So it makes it a little bit tight for us as a committee. Definitely by the January meeting, we would need somebody to come on to help us understand those three funds from an RTD point of view. And I don't know who that person is.
Yeah, we'll figure that out.
Thank you.
And Roger, you're right, of course. I mean, I my guess is that we don't really want the state legislature to be tromping on RTD. But, you know, any more than, frankly, when I was in local government, I liked the state legislature tromping on the local. But it's certainly common that when money is involved, it is often earmarked or dedicated to certain narrower purposes. That's kind of fair game. At least that's the way the game is played. And if that's what's going to happen to some of this money, then yeah, it's certainly in RTD's benefit if RTD, not us necessarily, but RTD, the board, makes it really clear what their priorities for the money is before the legislature just decides to spend it on something else. And I don't know, that, at least listening to Senator Winter, that conversation doesn't seem to be happening very effectively yet.
Well, I think it is happening. I think she may not like, or the governor's office may not like what they're hearing, and that's certainly their prerogative. I think we need to keep in mind that this committee would be making recommendations to the board relative to any of these, any of the decisions the agency's making on these different subjects. But I'll compile a list, and we'll have some subject matter experts available.
One thing I wanted to mention, and I know that it doesn't happen too often, everyone has their day jobs, but would it be possible to have a separate meeting in January on this topic so that when the official CAC meeting happens in the third week, everyone's beefed up on what it all means and has that under their wings.
We've done a special meeting once, although admittedly we then kind of canceled the next meeting. I think this topic is big enough that it would take us a while to work our way through whatever recommendations, and yes, indeed, our recommendation, of course, goes to the RTD board. That's the appropriate place. I think it would take us a while to work through that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. You could send an email out to everybody and see if people are willing to give that a whirl or not. No point doing it if people, aren't available. But
what's everyone's? Maybe use your reaction button on your screen. Thumbs up if you want to try to host us to schedule a special meeting, and let's just see where people are at. Don't thumbs up if you'd rather just keep it at just the one meeting. So we've got a few people willing to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Danny,
I think that's the challenge. We can get Danny out. I can compile some documents. I just don't know, what's available. So
yeah,
I'm somewhat concerned. Whoops, go ahead, Danny.
Oh, it's just when people come on here and present for a little bit or something, and I hesitate to share my perspective before learning a little more, especially when it's something technical. When somebody throws out like SB 260 and this and that and acronyms and initialisms, and I'm like, this is a citizens advisory committee, plain language. Like, I'm not to say that it's not to dumb it down, but to give time to either before meeting or after, give time to go through some resources so that I feel like when I do speak up or share something that I think might be part of an official recommendation of this group, that I feel like I've done my due diligence as a participant to understand enough anyway to start to form an opinion, if that makes sense. So I'm happy to put in that time personally to review things and commit to another meeting. And I should have the time to do that. And I'll work on some things in the meantime based on what I did. I was kind of checking things out as she was talking because I didn't know what she was talking about. And so even if you work on that, Roger, I'll do my part as well in the meantime.
Boy, Danny, you make a lousy politician. And that is I am applauding you actually as you so. I think we should get some information out, but what I guess I'm hoping for, especially if we had a special meeting and enough people could attend, is it would give us a chance to actually ask questions, both of invited guests and of each other, since there's a huge amount of expertise in the room. And you'd feel free to, ask whatever questions you have and get up to speed. None of us knows this stuff terribly well. I don't. And that would give us a chance to do that.
Well, if I can suggest, what I'll do is let me pull together the note summary, kind of bullet points. And like I did the summary of the meeting that I did not attend, I also included some links to documents in that email. So I can quickly turn around at least some, where we can find some background information, and then go from there.
I'd really like us to get a chance. I don't know how to time this. I feel like we need some kind of RTD feedback. Somebody from RTD who could give us some perspective on these funds that are available before we jump in to have our perspective. It's not quite right for us to move ahead and try to make a recommendation until we hear. And I don't even, like I said, I don't know who that should be, but that should be part of maybe that special meeting, even if somebody could give us some presentation about.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely.
So we definitely need that to be mixed in there.
And it'd also be nice to know what RTD's perspective, if they have one yet, because this is relatively new, is on the clean air money. In other words, do they have concerns about, well, sure, we could have free fares for a very limited amount of time, but is that really the best way to spend that money, or is there something else? Now, the board, again, this is new. It's not, I mean, it's just a budget proposal. It hasn't been approved by the legislature or anything. But I would think RTD staff and eventually the board will be looking at it. And it would sure be nice to know what their initial take is. So we don't have to agree with them, but we still need to know where they're coming from.
Mm-hmm.
Well, again, just to be, not to dampen everyone's enthusiasm, but we will spend the time to get up to speed. I don't know that there's any way to get ahead of what the legislature's doing if they're going to make a decision in January, because we will write up something that goes to our board.
Right.
So what if, if we did the 12th, are Wednesday afternoons good for people?
They're bad as anything.
I mean, we could schedule a time on that Wednesday and send it out, and that would give you, by the time I collect some things, that would give me some time to figure out also who we would want to have at that meeting. But it would give you some time to review in advance.
Yeah. It makes as much sense as any other time. But yeah, we need to make sure we get a reasonable number of our group who can make whatever a reasonable number means. But sure, why don't you at least shoot for that? I mean, it's a month away. Hopefully people can plan ahead.
All right, well, I'll send that out. I think that's better than trying to poll everyone on the committee and figure out a date that way. I just don't think we could do it realistically any sooner than that, just to be able to provide people the time to review. Okay. All right, well, that's all I had. If you all have anything.
Well, there was one more thing, a suggestion that came up. Actually, Joanna made it, and I think it's a great suggestion, which is, and since I said every meeting, I haven't said it yet at this one, wouldn't it be nice if we could get together in person about whether we could use your offices, not necessarily the one you're sitting in, which kind of looks like your house, but
it's my office upstairs.
Whether we could, in fact, use the space in your office that would work for us. We're not that big a group. It would solve the problem of meeting in the RTD offices, which clearly has its difficulties right now, and whether people would be interested in doing that.
And I think we weren't talking about monthly. We were just talking about having a face-to-face, an in-person meeting, perhaps February or March.
Well, yeah, no, certainly this is in January. This would be February, March. Yeah, a little.
This actually came up because we realized that we're talking about having, sitting down with board members in small groups.
Right.
We haven't all met each other face to face. And so that's why it made some sense to see if maybe February or March meeting that we get our own CAC together, regardless of what the agenda might be, and maybe meet at your offices if that's doable.
Oh, yeah, it's doable.
And I think because we haven't met each other, and that would be kind of nice if we could pull that off. And I don't know, I know there's a few folks here on the committee who might have conflict because there's other meetings that we're all spoiled and used to just pushing the Zoom button. So we need to double check to see what has to be done to make that work. But
we could have a Zoom up on for those that can't attend. So that's no problem.
Sure, that would be a great idea.
Right.
Anyway, that's where this came from, is we haven't actually seen a lot of our own committee. So anyway.
Well, let's tentatively plan on that or work towards that unless something gets in the way.
Sure.
We have a big space where everyone can spread out. We've got sofas and So it would be kind of it would not be crammed around a conference room table. It'd be a more informal space.
Yeah, well, I think that would work for us.
Yeah, it'd be great.
A topic or topics for then that would be kind of more the committee talking itself, which I think we could do.
Be nice. All right, let's plan on that. I'll look at the schedule and we'll figure out if it's February or March.
Sounds good.
All right.
Okay.
We're good.
Anything else from anybody? Thoughts other than happy holidays and all of that stuff, Danny?
Oh, well, I agree with the happy holidays part. I was just going to share something that was produced the other day by the Denverite, just showing the intersection with people experiencing homelessness and transportation. I don't know if you all saw it, but it's the kind of 18 hours spent kind of checking things out. And I think a lot during our meetings about the intersection of homelessness and RTD, and it's not on RTD to solve this, but it's like an inextricable link there, I think. And I just found it really interesting. Somebody passed it to me because they knew I was on this committee, and it's just, I don't know, it's just interesting. And it also reminds me that some people who weigh in about transportation issues do not take public transportation with regularity, and some of us do, and that totally feeds into my passion for this and what I bring to these meetings. So, but this is for the area also at Central Station that I don't, or Union Station that I don't frequent. So, just thought I would share that.
Well, I'll say I appreciate you bringing it up. We have a co-chairs call that we start to look at agenda items, and this was actually one item that it's on my list to discuss because I do think it's there has been a lot of media coverage. I know Pauletta and Christina have been busy with dealing with media outlets on this, and there's a lot of implications. Work between Denver and RTD. Deborah Johnson's she's made some, I think, fairly strong and bold decisions to try to address this. And I think it would be a great topic to discuss. Not that we're going to solve it, but I think to really understand the challenges that RTD faces and how you manage both our mission to be accessible to all, and also the challenges the drivers have had, et cetera. So
yeah.
Danny, thank you for bringing that up. As Roger said, it's been our topic of conversation this last week and a half, or most of this month, I would say. And even that before that, this year, the earlier part of this year, we have been talking about just generally safety and of course, people experiencing homelessness. And we have worked with with APTA, the American Public Transportation Association, earlier this year, did a peer evaluation. They gave us a list of about 57 things that we could be improving on or adjusting. And then from there, we've even brought a consultant on board to take a look at how we might implement these things. What are some of the ways that we could do some easier items, say they're easier to implement, or, are some of these things a little bit more complicated and complex in which we might need to do something over the course of several years, like a 5-year plan. So that is all coming together. I'll mention that there's a lot of work going on in the background. And I know it's hard when we see articles like this. It seemingly seems like RTD is not doing enough or has done nothing to move on those recommendations that we know to be something that the board has been looking at. But there's a lot of work and thoughtfulness behind it, because as you said, it's not as easy when you're talking about a public space, and people, certainly have a right to enjoy the public spaces. But at the same time, it's not something that we can continue to foster when it's illegal activity, when it's, drug use. And some of this, and it comes over to the just the laws that have come into place where, you know, there's been some loosening of the laws around drug, you know, carrying a certain amount of drugs, and that for police officers changes the way that they're able to enforce. So it definitely, you really, you know, the way you mentioned is it comes out to be as a bigger societal issue, not just an RTD issue, and it just means that everybody happens to gather at RTD. But even if they were not gathering at our places of transportation, they folks would be still doing and carrying out these items somewhere else, because there's a lot of work to be done in enforcement.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like this is, I mean, homelessness is not just about homelessness. It's about so many different things coming together, right? And it is something, I think there are many social issues that don't require whole of government approaches, and thinking of RTD as like connected there in some way, but this is one I think that it necessitates that, and it's so big. And so I didn't read this and criticize in my mind any one group. It just is an interesting way to experience something over many hours and to share, you know, those conversations and interactions, and to think about how that affects, you know, each kind of actor and all of this. But I know it's huge. It is, I think, one of the most difficult things that our country faces, and then leading, you know, feeding down to our region. Yeah.
Well, you didn't criticize RTD, but there sure were plenty of people that did. And like you said, a lot of them are not really transit riders. So.
Yeah. Well, and it's too easy to, it's too obvious. And, you know, I don't know if I've shared this a lot, but, you know, my formal education and a lot of my work is in intractable conflict and really complex conflicts. And I look at this as a social conflict, and how I would never be drawn to criticize any one group without looking at the whole system and seeing how things interact, because RTD could change some things and for the positive, let's say, and it would possibly have a negative effect on some other group in some way. So I'm pretty, I try to stay level-headed, I guess, with some of that. And I'm not always, I admit.
Right. All right.
Okay, I think we've got it. I think we have our marching orders for January and probably February and March for that matter. So thanks, everybody. It was a great meeting. Senator Winter was terrific, needless to say. And again, happy holidays and a happy new year, and we will see you next year.
All right. Everyone have a great holiday.
Yeah, thanks,
Happy
Matt.
holidays, everyone.
Holidays.
Thank you for everything you do.